Hello and welcome in. We are back for another edition. It's a bonus edition of the Recruiting Blitz podcast brought to you by Inside Nebraska. I am Greg Smith, Senior Recruiting Analyst here at Inside Nebraska. I am joined once again by Digital Content Specialist Extraordinaire, Jansen Coburn. Jansen, how are you, man?
Doing good, Greg. Excited to wrap up this class.
Yeah, it's time to do a signing day wrap up, and we took a lot of great questions from our insiders board, our subscribers over there who submitted quite a few questions, which is we'll kind of get through here. We got a Q&A section at the end, and we also have some bank that we'll have for our next episode as well as we kind of turn the page to 2024 as well. But there is a lot to dive into because it has been a whirlwind of a recruiting class for Matt Rhule and his staff here for this transition class for 2023. There are 28 traditional signees, I guess, 27 high schoolers, one JUCO player, and Kai Whalen, that I feel like everyone forgets about. And then there were also 11 transfers that, as Matt Rhule said yesterday during his press conference, have all made it to campus. So there is plenty to dive into. So why don't we just jump right into it, Jansen? What's your first question for us to start blitzing through?
Yeah, real quick, Greg, I just want to say thank you to all of the people who have been liking our video and subscribing. It's been helping us with support and all that good stuff. And thank you to everyone who asked a question. We have some questions we'll be answering at the end of this video. With that being said, first question for you, Greg, is what is your gut reaction to this class as a whole, both the guys that signed yesterday and in the first signing day?
Yeah, I think my gut reaction, if I could have to describe this class, versatility and speed, I think are the two things that really come together when I think about this class. Like obviously, and Matt Rhule talked about this at length on Wednesday, that, you know, those track times for him, I think his exact word was, it's like a rock to guide him or to lean on once if you have a little bit of question about guys, but it's also stuff that they're looking for, having those verified track speeds. And there are plenty of guys not only that are very fast and athletic, and it's not just the speed guys. You've also got guys that throw as well, coming over in this class. Is that they think this staff believes that they can take those athletes and then turn them into football players. They can teach them the other things. And if you look at it, there's a strong history that this group has of doing that at both Temple and Baylor, their previous two college stops. So I think that speed and athleticism is definitely a part of it. But then the versatility of the class, you know, when you have a transition class like this and it's as large as it is, I think having a lot of guys that could end up playing different spots depending on how things shake out once they get to campus is important. So you think about a guy like Jalen Lloyd, that could play wide receiver or defensive back. There's a little bit of a battle there between the coaches right now about where he's going to play, and you can utilize that speed. Jason Michachok from South Dakota had kind of a similar thing on the lines, where he kind of was told that he was going to be an offensive lineman when he committed. They've talked a little bit about it, and he's already now thinking it's defensive line. And there's a number of guys like that in the class. So versatility and speed, definitely the gut reaction to this class.
Now, considering all of the guys that they signed, who would you say is the single biggest recruiting win for Nebraska?
Man, it's hard not to say that it's Malachi Coleman, and for a multitude of reasons. He's the clear, like, kind of wins the crown of the highest rated recruit in the class. But he also, it's so important for you to, when Nebraska has those types of players in their backyard, for them to actually keep them home. Like it makes it, because while Nebraska high school football talent is definitely on the rise, and I've been beating that drum for a few years now, it is better than people think. And I think that this coaching staff has also said that a couple of times, right? We've seen them say that as they've been surprised by the overall talent. Still, that top end talent, like a guy like Malachi Coleman, who's a borderline 5-star, who going to the All-Star games, performed well out in Hawaii. When you land a guy like that, it makes a huge difference in your class. And it is a great test case for Matt Rhule, as it feels like, because Malachi is now like all in and like you've seen all the stuff, you kind of forget that he did decommit after once around the time that Matt Rhule was hired, and then came back into the class. That is a great sign for Matt Rhule and being able to kind of reel him back in and build those relationships quickly with players. So yeah, for me, it's Malachi Coleman.
Now, on the flip side of that, who would be their single greatest recruiting miss or loss from the class?
Yeah, so here's the thing on that, and it's really interesting because so much has happened in this class, and there have been a lot of positives. And Zach Carpenter and I, our publisher here, we talked about this in our rapid recap video that you can find right here on YouTube as well. Is that there was a lot of positive momentum, right? Like a lot of things did go right. But there is a thing that is not necessarily all the way tied into just this staff that I think people have forgotten about, and that's quarterback recruiting. Like, if you go look at the amount of high-end quarterbacks that were not just in this state this year with Zane Flores, but also kind of in the region with Avery Johnson out in Kansas, Lincoln Kienholz, who's up in the South Dakota, who ended up going to Ohio State, JJ Cole, who's over in Enki, Iowa, who is another kid that Nebraska had on the radar, but just kind of cooled on, I guess. Quarterback recruiting for the actual 2023 signing class was a huge miss. I don't know if you're going to have are you going to have another year like this where you have basically, was it four-star kids in the region in driving distance from your campus, and you're really not in the mix for any of them. Like, it's going to be fascinating to see moving forward, tracking how those guys do in college. But that's definitely a miss. Again, not all on the Rhule staff, obviously. And they did try, because someone's going to ask in the comments, they did try to get back in with Zane Flores. He basically said thanks, but no thanks to Nebraska and a whole host of other schools because he was solid with Oklahoma State.
Now, if you had to assign a letter grade for the job Matt Rhule and his staff did as a whole for the whole class, A through F, what letter grade would you assign and why?
My gut reaction here says a B plus. And the only reason that we're going B plus, because I'm taking the high school class and the transfer hall all in one, because anymore you kind of have to do that. The reason why it's not an A or an A minus is because of the two big offensive linemen that Nebraska really thought they had. One that they actually had committed in Walter Rouse, and the other Micah Mazuka, who they really felt that they had the inside track on, and thought that he was going to commit here, ended up committing to Florida. If they had landed those two guys to go along with Ben Scott, who's going to be the starting center for Nebraska, you would have been cooking with something there. I would have really thought that this offense would have had a much clearer path or cleaner path to taking some real steps forward in year one under Matt Rhule. So because of missing those two guys, I've got to knock it down a little bit. But it's a good haul overall, especially for just having a couple months on the job, coming back to college from the NFL game. Also, the ranking, Nebraska is per rivals at 24, and also overall in the country, 4th in the Big Ten after yesterday. So that's good. Like that's a really good start and should make people excited for what can happen in 24. But we'll get there. But yeah, B plus is where I would go.
Now, with all that being said, are there any holes in this class or positions that they can continue to add to via the transfer portal?
Yeah, there's two that kind of jump out. Defensive line, I think, is the first one, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how it all plays together. Like how, because I don't count for defensive line. It is very difficult to count on high school players to come in and make an impact for that, right? As highly as I think of Riley Van Poppel coming out of Texas for Nebraska, it's going to be really difficult for him to come up here and play as a true freshman, and it's hard to expect that. So they're going to have to address this via the transfer portal, or they're also going to have to coach up the guys that they have. So they got Elijah Judy out of the transfer portal. I think he'll be kind of a big defensive lineman for them, and he has a chance, obviously, to be right in the mix. But can Nebraska get Ty Robinson closer to his ceiling that people believe that he has? Can they continue do the same thing with Nash Hutmacher? Can a guy like Ruquan Buckley step up? Those types of things will be really interesting moving forward. But I definitely think they'll have to go in the portal for defensive linemen. And the other spot right behind that is inside linebacker. Like, I think that they're just going to have to figure that out. But it's one of those things, and Matt Rhule alluded to this in his press conference too, about we don't know the final positions for some of these guys, right? And some guys can slide into that role. Is there a safety on the team, like a Deshaun Singleton maybe, that can slide down into that linebacker spot that they like playing sideline to sideline with? What happens with a guy like Randolph Kapai, right? There's a lot there. So they'll get a long look at those guys during spring. And then in that next transfer period, if you see them going heavily after inside linebackers, it'll tell you a little bit about, if it was a hole or not coming out of the signing day.
Now, what's the single strongest position group haul that they brought in this class? Where did they not miss?
I do not think that they missed a wide receiver. It's hard to look at that group of wideouts that is coming in and think that because one of the things that jumps out just looking at the group is that it's varied, right? It's got some different diversity to it about body types, skill sets, and it's got a mixture of guys to me like Malachi Coleman that have very high ceilings, but that also just based on his size and athleticism should always have kind of a baseline of skill out there as well. And I think he could get out there early. A guy like Jaden Doss, who I think is criminally underrated in this class. And I think that he has a chance to contribute fairly quickly. But then you have kind of raw guys like a Jeremiah Charles, who was a 200-meter dash state champion in Texas. And he also got a guy, speaking of speed, Bryce Turner coming out of Bay City, Texas. So you've got some raw guys for Garrett McGuire to work with, the new wide receivers coach. But then you also have some guys just in the recruiting class that I think have kind of high ceilings, but also higher basements as well, if that makes sense. And then in the transfer group as well, with Kemp coming in as well, I think that he's a guy that's in line to maybe start for them, playing a little bit of that outside receiver, some inside as well. I think that wide receiver group is deep and pretty good.
Yeah, Greg. Now, who was your single favorite recruit to cover in this cycle? I know you got to know some of them and their families personally, and then there were some fun ones how the recruiting played out. So which one was your favorite if you had to pick one?
Man, that's really hard. Riley Van Poppel is a really great one. He's probably the best like interview in the class. And so he's really great. And so I'll give you two. He's really fun. I also always kind of gravitate towards offensive linemen. And Sam Sledge is my favorite offensive lineman in the class, both kind of to talk to because he's a throwback old school kid. He doesn't say a ton, but when he talks to you, he's a nice kid. And you can tell that he likes to hit people, which is great for the offensive lineman. And I think he's going to end up being a pretty good prospect as well. I think that he'll, end up being a center down the road for Nebraska. So yeah, those are a couple of guys that really stand out to me.
Very well. All right. Should we hop into some Q&A? Our very first one?
Let's do it. I'm excited about this.
Once again, thank you to everyone who asked a question, and you can ask questions for future episodes. And a lot of our questions were for 2024, which we're going to save for the next episode since this one's more about 2023s. So, and right off the bat, as I look at these questions, most of them are 2024. So we'll take a couple of those. First one, this person is very confident. They said, when, not if, Dylan Raiola commits, how many 4- and 5-star commits will Nebraska sign? And I'm guessing that's hard to put a number on. So I guess I would rephrase that question, Greg, and ask you, how would Dylan Raiola's commitment impact the quality of the class?
Yeah, I think it is difficult at this point, as we record on February 2nd, to give like an actual number on that. And I think that but you will be able to dive into that as we get deeper into the cycle, probably after the spring game, once stuff starts to move with the 2024 class. It would be a huge bump if Nebraska lands the number one player in the entire country that is a quarterback that has a great personality. He's a really good kid. He's really well known, as the number one player in the country generally is. He also happens to, like, when you're that level of recruit, you just know other high level recruits, right? So he's been on visits to every big time school that's out there. And so what happens is those teams also bring in other big time players, so you get to know them. Then you also have 7-on-7. So you just get to know a lot of kids. I think that it would be a big bump, because what ends up happening is it's not just they've got a really highly rated player in the class, so that's cool. It's also a trust thing, right? So if you're a kid, say you're Bubba Hampton down in Texas, who's a 5-star player, he's an athlete that could either play wide receiver or cornerback. If you're him, you say, well, Dylan trusts Matt Rhule and his staff. Maybe I should give them a second look. And Bubba is a good example, but not because he already has a really good relationship with Nebraska staff, so that helps as well. But that will get the attention of other big time high level recruits that Nebraska would be going after. It would be a really big deal, because then there's all sorts of stuff for you to sell for Nebraska for the 2024 class.
Here's another one from our Insiders board. And by the way, all of these are from the Insiders board. So thank you to everyone who's a part of that. Would you agree it seems like our coaching staff came at this recruiting cycle with a very targeted approach? Rather than casting a wide net that says offer all 1st and 2nd tier players and see who bites, it seemed way more specific than that.
Absolutely, in one word. And one thing that I think that we're all figuring out about Matt Rhule and his staff is there is a plan. They will go and execute that plan, and if that plan doesn't happen to pan out, there is a backup plan and probably a plan after that. These guys, they are hardworking, has come up a lot, but they are also very detailed and organized. And I think that the reason, though, and it's such a great question, because the reason I think that people are picking up on that level of detail and organization about the offer specifically is that it feels like Nebraska now has an idea of what they're looking for specifically on the recruiting trail. And you hear that when you talk about Matt Rhule, talk about the size that they like, or you heard Terrence Knighton talk about that too during his press conference recently, but then also some of those track times that they're also looking for. And the big thing is that they can go on the recruiting trail and say to kids, hey, we like you because you do X, Y, and Z. And here's how that matches up with a kid that we had at Temple or Baylor or what we saw in the NFL. And that, I think, is a really strong selling point because they have a clear identity of what they're actually looking for, which will then help them look like a more cohesive team once this thing starts going and we get a couple of years down the road.
Okay, now this one asks, besides the Stanford offensive tackle, who this person says was our biggest miss in the class, that you thought could join after the coaching change, it seems like we got the majority of the targets we had a chance with. So who was the biggest nice surprise in the class?
Man, the biggest nice surprise, maybe, man, if it's, because again, we're combining them. Eric Gilbert was, I did not think, I knew that Nebraska was kind of in the mix there. I was pretty surprised that Nebraska ended up landing him, especially when you have a kind of a first-time Power 5 assistant or college assistant in Bob Wager, who came from high school as a legendary high school football coach down there in Texas. Being able to pull that off, I think, was a really big deal, and it can really open up the offense. And we've got a great breakdown of that on this channel as well about how that can work. And I know that people are dreaming of that Eric Gilbert, Thomas Fedoni, two tight end set. Everybody's ready to see that. But I thought that was a really nice surprise get for Nebraska down the stretch here, because I think that can be really impactful in a lot of ways going forward.
And then who would you say is the biggest sleeper in this class?
Man, my answer to this, to be totally honest, has changed a couple of times because there are a couple of really good candidates for this. For this one, I will give you Quentin Ives, the running back out of New Jersey. I think he's a guy that EJ Barthel, the running backs coach, has loved at a couple of different stops. He liked him when he was at UConn previously as well. And so I think that he's a guy, a super athlete kid that scored over 1,000 points in his high school basketball career as well. Also, participates in some track. Stop me if you've heard that before. And he's a really good running back prospect that has some good size to him too. And they could either bulk him up and let him be a little bit more powerful runner, or you can keep him about the size that he is now and continue to use him in multiple ways, either catching the ball out of the backfield or traditional handoffs, even jet sweeps. I really like the potential of Quentin Ives and what he could do as a chess piece within this offense.
Yeah, that's all the questions we have for this one. We got a lot of 2024 ones, which we will answer in the next episode. So we appreciate you guys for asking those. But Greg, that's all I have.
Yeah, it's been a fun one. This cycle has been extremely unique as we've gone from basically, we've had 3 different coaches kind of go through this cycle, and it's easy to kind of forget that. As we started with Scott Frost and what he was doing, and then Mickey Joseph came in and had a totally different plan, and then Matt Rhule came in and took it a totally different way. And so it's just been a wild ride. I am looking forward to kind of settling things down and kind of being a little more straightforward for the 2024 class. But again, thank you to everybody watching. It's been some really great feedback on the podcast as we've got this thing up and rolling. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can get these videos right directly into your feed. Like this video up, tell a friend as well. Make sure you're checking out Inside Nebraska, nebraska.rivals.com for continued recruiting coverage and more. And we will catch you guys next time.